They drive by this property every day, twice, on the way into school and on the way out of the school. It's literally off of the entrance to the school and separated by the chain link fence I mentioned. Well, when it was just a forest, the kids had nothing to say about it. But now that they can identify it and they can see some of the markers, etc., it starts off their conversation in school.
Welcome to Lost Soldiers, a production of Wreaths Across America Radio, brought to you by SaveCedarGrove.org and HistorySouth.org. Here are your hosts, Ché Abdullah and Dr. Tom Hanchett.
And good morning. We are here for our first episode of Lost Soldiers. I am your host, Ché Abdullah, here with my co-host.
I'm Tom Hanchett. I'm a community historian. I've got a PhD.
And we are ready to talk about Lost Soldiers.
We're grateful to Veterans Bridge Home. We'll tell you more about them, who've been helpful with this. Wreaths Across America, and also the Carolina Room of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library. John O'Connor has set us up with podcast space and a lot of input on the history of African-American history makers, military folks who are buried in a cemetery on the west side of Charlotte off Beatties Ford Road called Cedar Grove, or sometimes Cedar Hill. And set the stage. Tell about Cedar Grove Cemetery. What do you see when you go there?
Well, thanks for that intro, Tom. Cedar Grove Cemetery is located in the Beatties Ford corridor, historically black, well-recognized area here in Charlotte. The cemetery sits in front of University Park Creative Arts School, just off Hildebrand Street. And the cemetery's been abandoned since 1972.
Wow.
As far as we know, the last owner of record, John Sheed Davidson, will be a big part of a lot of the stories we tell. His commitment to that location and the history built around it and how it ended up abandoned for several decades will certainly be a big part of the topic that we discuss.
Tell a little bit about your background. You're somebody who was part of the behind-the-scenes team that helped make the Discovery Channel a household name back in the day. And you've ended up back home in North Carolina. Talk about your trajectory and how you found this cemetery.
So I am I'm a native of Winston-Salem, North Carolina, oddly enough, and left at a very young age to grow up in the Washington, D.C. area. As you mentioned, I was fortunate enough to join the Discovery Channel back then. In the early days of expanding that network into the empire that it is today. So that experience was really wonderful, got me interested in a lot of nonfiction topics, not history per se, but the opportunity presented itself and we were excited about it. So what I know about Cedar Grove is, again, from working at the school, discovered a gentleman in the woods one day with a camera pointed at him, and we mentioned my background, so of course I was very curious to know what was happening with that. And when I approached, I met a gentleman named Kevin Donaldson, who was working on his master's thesis. Through his interactions with his professor, Dr. Willie Griffin, Cedar Grove was his choice. When we met, Kevin explained to me what was happening at that property. I was very unaware. And that it was a historically significant black burial ground connected to, of all places, the Brooklyn neighborhood that we lost here in Charlotte due to urban renewal. All those things really sparked me to find out more about the place, but more importantly, I was really inspired to find a way to share these stories with the community. Because what we were able to discover was so fascinating about the contributions a lot of these folks had made, the lives that they had lived, and of course, the veteran experience of African Americans here, not only in Charlotte, but it really did affect the entire United States. And I'm sure a lot of those stories are very similar to other stories we'll find or that exist in the American lexicon.
And you dug into being part of the neighborhood. You worked freelance and had a little bit of time at one point said, can I be a substitute teacher at the University Park Art School? And talk about getting the kids involved in this history digging, history exploring.
What immediately struck me about the stories within Cedar Grove and the location was that it was separated by a chain link fence from a majority African American school, with these young learners there being completely unaware, with no plans really to expose them to this hyper-local history that, in my opinion, would give them a great opportunity to grow their self-efficacy, feel more comfortable about the sense of place that they're able to establish by learning more about the people who lived there before them, and to get them really, again, engaged with those stories. The challenge immediately with Cedar Grove was that I could not bring kids to the work site. University Park Creative Arts is a K-5 school. So, between 10 and 6 are a little too young to be in such a dangerous place. And it really is a work site. What will happen with our podcast is we'll get some photos up of the activities that have happened there and kind of show you some before and afters. But what we had hoped, or what we wanted to do once we got wind of some of the information about these folks, is to package it in a way where we could engage the kids to not only learn about this history, but build their digital media literacy and have an opportunity to retell this story in some type of digital fashion. So cool. We're hoping to get that going with the kids at UPCA this semester. So a lot of exciting stuff.
Wonderful. West Side History Club, that's what it's called.
That's what it was called, Tom. West Side History Club. We are working to see what it's going to manifest into, but that was a great start and really does identify what we hope to establish with the kids is a club format where it's low level achievement. We're not testing, we're not preparing them for some massive exam on the West Side history or the history of this cemetery. The whole idea is really just to share with them and give them an opportunity to have that sort of third space where they can converse, feel comfortable, learn things without the pressure associated.
Yeah, learning is not memorizing the facts that are in the history books. Learning is a process. You make it up as you go along. And if you have a good coach like Ché Abdullah, you can go far. So that's why I'm excited about this. I wrote a book about Charlotte called Sorting Out the New South City, which looked at how Charlotte became a big city. We're the 15th largest city in the United States. But also how it became a segregated city. And segregation did not just happen. So I've been very interested in African American history. I'm a white person. I'm an outsider in this story. But in fact, most of us are outsiders in some way, even in stories that we're connected with in other ways. So I really dig the fact that untold stories are all around us. And anything that I can do to work with people to help them uncover their own stories. Near University Park School are two of the most recently designated historic districts in Charlotte. Oaklawn Park, built in the late 1950s as an African-American neighborhood, and McCrory Heights, which has an even deeper history. A lot of civil rights leaders, a lot of ministers, a lot of business leaders lived in McCrory Heights. I was able to help both of those neighborhoods as they did the research to create that historic district designation. So I'm excited to learn about the 20 or so veterans who are interred at Cedar Grove Cemetery. And when Ché came to me, one of the first things he said is we're working with a veterans group in Charlotte called Veterans Bridge Home.
Thank you for that, Tom. And those guys are fantastic. Also, I'm a big fan of your work. I love the book, Sorting Out the New South. One of the main reasons I approached you about this is that I really, really respect your engagement with the community, your ferocity about finding out this often very hidden information, and then, quite frankly, your interest in what this does for the community and the folks that you're able to interact with by sharing this information. So when you talk about a group like Veterans Bridge Home, I get misty-eyed because what has happened in that relationship has really been phenomenal. Aaron Harper, at the time, was in a position to do community engagement with Veterans Bridge Home through the Students Veterans Association. We were connected. That happened because a student at UNCC, Bethany Mavromotis, came out for one of our cleanups. She recognized the state of the veterans at rest, and happened to be doing an internship at Veterans Bridge Home. So they got engaged immediately. Over the past year, those guys have organized a monthly cleanup at the site.
Wow.
Bringing out 50 to 100 people.
Wow.
From employee resource groups at some of the largest companies in Charlotte. So with that commitment from Veterans Bridge Home, we've been able to really clear the cemetery. It's identifiable as a cemetery now. We can see headstones from the street. I'll share an anecdotal effect of that on the kids was that they drive by this property every day, twice, on the way into school and on the way out of the school. It's literally off of the entrance to the school and separated by the chain link fence I mentioned. Well, when it was just a forest, the kids had nothing to say about it. But now that they can identify it and they can see some of the markers, etc., it starts off their conversation in school. They hop off the bus, they get in, they have questions, they ask, who are these people? Tell us more. How does this history relate to us and to our school? So that's been a really wonderful thing, and it's going to be one of the points we use to jump off with the West Side History Club that we're going to do with the kids at University Park Creative Arts, which was ultimately our goal.
So you got community connections, you've got veteran connections, you've got kid connections, people who are coming at this history from a bunch of different directions. Let's talk about who's there, just to give a sense of these ordinary history makers. What it does by digging into this particular cemetery, you may not have any direct connection to it, but I think you'll hear stories that resonate with you, whoever you are. There are about 20 marked graves of veterans. There may be more. Ché and I have both done various kinds of research. You came up with information about their military service. How did that happen?
Well, information about the military service of our soldiers in Cedar Grove.
Yeah.
Well, you're a big part of that, Tom, quite frankly. What I was able to find through some amateur digging and working with some local historians like J. Michael Moore, was able to find out a lot about that location and what was happening there, and a lot about the ownership of that cemetery, which
was begun by African-American entrepreneurs. At that point, there are very few municipal cemeteries.
Yeah.
And this was back in
1914 is the earliest burial we have there.
Just about the time of World War I.
So again, really exciting timing history-wise. What was happening in the community really, again, jumped out through some of that research. Some of the early findings we had, unrelated to soldiers, but one of the oldest African-American businesses in Charlotte was the Alexander Funeral Home. They were also an early owner of this particular property. Unlike most cemeteries, or quite a few cemeteries, this was a private business. It was not associated or attached to a church per se. Although one of our most famous interred, or most recognized interred, and I say that with a bit of a laugh, is that his memorial is so ornate and so large that it stands out. It is the one thing that you see when you approach Cedar Grove now that it's cleared, and that is Pastor R.H. Bruce, who was the pastor of the Grace AME Church, which still stands and was a centerpiece of the community known as Brooklyn prior to the urban renewal that happened. So what I love, again, about Cedar Grove is that it stands as a marker for the lives and times of the people that lived there and what they were doing and how prosperous that community was able to become post-emancipation. And when, the African-American community was left to itself, it demonstrated a propensity for high success.
Cool.
And Brooklyn typifies that. So these stories are really important for the
Brooklyn
community.
Is a neighborhood that pretty much doesn't exist anymore except in memory. about 4 buildings left. It's the area where the government center is in Charlotte, the NASCAR Hall of Fame, the new medical college. It's several miles from Beatties Ford Road, so we'll talk about those connections. Let me just kind of give a teaser of some of the things that we've turned up through Ché's research and through work I've been able to do through the Carolina Room of the Public Library, looking at vintage newspapers, which are now available online, word searchable, through an organization called Newsbank and also another one called newspapers.com. We are able to track down the stories of a number of those 20 veterans, most of them from World War II, some of them from World War I, a few from eras before that or after that. And this opens the door to stories elsewhere in Charlotte, like the Brooklyn neighborhood, the Pottstown neighborhood in the Huntersville community, but also to things that you might find in national history books. One of the stories is the Red Ball Express. African Americans were very active in truck driving, in the loading and unloading of all of the stuff that you need at the front in order to have battles. There was an operation in 1944 that was essential to winning the war in Europe in World War II, called the Red Ball Express. We'll run into that. Another one that has some connection with Cedar Grove Cemetery is the story of the Tuskegee Airmen. African Americans, well, they can't fly planes. Yes, they can if they are well trained, and Tuskegee Institute in Alabama took on that work. Charlie Sifford. Folks know about Charlie Sifford? Say a word about him.
Oh, Charlie Sifford is a great story. We've just referred to him as Charlie, but it is Dr. Charles Sifford, who, in addition to being a respected veteran, also holds the claim for Charlotte as the first black PGA golfer. We
came out of Charlotte, went national, played for decades. There are books about Charlie Sifford. And I'm saying Charlie because that was the way that he often came about there. But indeed, Dr. Charles Sifford.
And I just think it's important to make that delineation that he accomplished all of these things, earning a doctorate, becoming a pro golfer, serving his country in the military, and again, a lot of attention is paid to his golf career. But we happen to know and have several of Charlie's family members still active in the community, doing wonderful things, and we look forward to talking to them a lot more about his experience, what they learned from him, what his service and time and accomplishments have meant to that family and to this community overall. So it's a great jumping off point to really demonstrate that the service of African American soldiers carried over into the community life and community building when they were able to return.
Life on the home front, one of the big things we hope to dig into in the podcast here. Black neighborhoods. I mentioned Pottstown in the Huntersville area. Wonderful woman there who safeguards that history named B.J. Caldwell. We hope to have her on the podcast here. Second Ward High School, the flagship black high school in the first half of the 20th century. Arthur Griffin, we're hoping that he will join us as well on the podcast, someone who safeguards that history. And talk about some of the wider stories, military installations in both the World War I era and the World War II era. The military installations included not just the major military bases that so many people went to train at, but also smaller regional centers. Charlotte was the center for a training base in World War I called Camp Green, and in World War II, the Army Quartermaster Depot was here, what's now the Camp North End area. So all of these stories, no matter where you're listening, are reflected in your community as well. And we're hoping that by looking at these ordinary history makers, looking at the stories on the battlefield, on the home front, the support folks who make the military function, that you'll find things that are exciting and interesting to you. So let's shift gears and talk about some of the folks that we'll meet in more depth in future episodes. Some fascinating folks that including Ché's grandfather.
Right. How about that? How about that piece?
I'm going to start with that story, or get you to that story. And again, we'll dig into these more. But one of the people who's buried in Cedar Grove Cemetery is Wendell French, Wendell F. French. And Ché's research turned up that he was a staff sergeant in a field artillery battalion in World War II. He was stationed in England. And when the battalion wasn't training or preparing for battle, the officers could go off base and explore the English countryside, which, for a young man from the United States in his early 20s, probably at that point, he got to go and explore small town England and Wales and discovered pubs. He loved that culture. Because he himself had been involved in bootlegging back in the day in Charlotte. And he wrote about this. Neither Ché nor I had ever heard of this, but some battalions did yearbooks where they wrote up their experiences. And we found that for Wendell French. And he writes in his own hand about this joyful cross-cultural encounter fueled by the love of drink and the love of song, teaching American songs to the English people and trying to figure out the English traditional songs for the day-to-day. And anyways, I sent this to Ché Abdullah, and he got really excited because he knew somebody else in the yearbook. Tell that story.
Well, I mean, who knew, Tom? When we got into this, we've done that conversation about what drew me to this work, what draws you to this work, and why we've come together to expand it, and how fitting and almost comedic that one of the first bits of information we're able to dig up is on the 463rd Port Company. I believe I have that correct, but we will make a note. Which was Wendell French's unit, and where these stories, collections of stories you were able to come across, were listed in sort of the 463rd Company. I don't know what they called them, a travel manual or a yearbook or an annual of their time in battle. But as I was reading this information that Tom provided me, one of the first names I come across in the book is my grandfather. I've shared this story multiple times now because it's just so exhilarating and exciting. But throughout the years, I've asked my family about my grandfather's military service. And most of the responses I've gotten, he had 5 kids. And I've heard probably at least 15 times, that's 3 per child, that they have no idea whether he served or not, if he served, and what he did during his service. So now through this research and through, I don't know what you call it, serendipity, here we are. And I'm able, from this research, to share with my family, some unknown celebrations and accomplishments of my grandfather, who we're all very proud of, who was also a bootlegger. So I don't know if him and Wendell had some collusion or discussions there on how to operate in that capacity. But, wonderful people, wonderful times, learning about what it took to survive.
Yeah.
I know very well from my grandfather's experience, and his experience with that is that it was for survival. And like I said, he had 5 children in a time where work was difficult to find, where respect was impossible to find. But here we all are, several generations later, celebrating the service of my grandfather and these other soldiers of Cedar Grove, which I think is long overdue. And I'm really excited to be engaged with it. And really, Tom, I can't wait to learn more and go through this process with you of sharing the knowledge we're able to obtain about these folks.
Let me tease a couple more of these stories, and then let's draw this episode to a close. and we hope that you'll come back with us to another one. We mentioned bootleggers being outside the law when the law is not as respectful as it might be of African American communities. Not unusual. At a very different kind of level, we'll have the story of Bernard Hempel, who was a proud graduate of Second Ward High School. High schools, it wasn't given that folks were going to go to high school, much less graduate from high school in the South back in the day, particularly if you were African American. Bernard Hempel came back to Charlotte after graduating from Second Ward High and then serving in the military to go to a new college that was established with money from the GI Bill, from the efforts to welcome and support veterans as they came back in, the GI Bill. And in Charlotte, there was an institution called Carver College in honor of the African-American scientist George Washington Carver. Carver College, a predecessor of today's Central Piedmont Community College, UNC Charlotte, and Bernard Hempel was one of the student leaders in that college. A very different kind of story. There's a lot of hardship that these stories capture. There was a fellow named Commodore Kirkpatrick. We had to do some detective work. We found that was actually his name. He was not a Commodore. His name was Commodore. He, before his military service, bought a house lot in Charlotte's Cherry neighborhood, 1927. And then right on the heels of that came the nationwide Great Depression. And he lost that property to foreclosure. And we imagine that joining the military was a strategy that offered hope, the hope of some economic security at that time. So lots of stories. A lot of the soldiers buried at Cedar Grove Cemetery, the rank of private, the military's lowest rank. That's about all we know about them. But there are several where we've been able to find with Ché Abdullah's work and Mike Moore's work records that list specialized jobs for the war effort, World War I, World War II. World War II, Thomas McNabb, one name we'll mention in our future podcast, served in the Navy as a steward's mate first class, doing the work of getting the soldiers fed. And that's a powerful story. A different kind of behind-the-scenes work was working as a quartermaster in the Quartermaster Corps. Harrison Davis was in the Resource Labor Battalion in the Quartermaster Corps in World War I. World War II, a guy named Joe Paths, buried at Cedar Grove Cemetery, was a technician in the Quartermaster Truck Company. So different kinds of stories, different ways that African Americans made their way on the home front and in the military, and all of that will be part of our upcoming episodes.
Tom, that was a great introduction to some of the things that we're going to be looking at. And of course, I have just a few comments and questions. One of the regarding Bernard Hempel, what a fascinating gentleman he turns out to be after his service. Spent some time in California, I believe, with a pretty hoity job out there. And at the end of, after that experience, he came back to Charlotte. What I learned through some of our research is that Bernard lived literally across the street from the cemetery.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, he's buried within 30 feet of the home he lived in, his last known address. I also was able to find Wendell French's home from some of the research that you were able to provide. And his home is right on, his former home is right on Beatty's Ford and is now a mosque.
Excellent.
Right.
Wow.
So, I mean, we're learning some just amazing things along those lines as well. Commodore Kirkpatrick, how fitting to be born with a name that lends itself to service. So these are, I can't wait to get more into these stories and learn more about what the service is about. One of the big things that you mentioned I think is important for us to set up here is the quartermaster. What in the world would a quartermaster do?
What's
and why
a
would
quartermaster?
that be such an important role?
Well,
to fill?
if you're a television watcher, you may have run across the show MASH, the Army Surgical Unit, the Mobile Army Surgical Hospital thing that happened in the MASH television show during the Korean War. But it actually was invented out of Charlotte, this notion that you could bring a hospital up near the front lines. And that worked because there was a network behind the lines that could get supplies where they needed to go. If you know the MASH TV show, you may remember Radar O'Reilly, the guy who was always on the phone trying to get supplies from the quartermaster depot. And that brings us to what's a quartermaster depot? Well, it is the place that has all of the stuff that you need for fighting. I'm not sure whether weapons were part of that. I don't think so. But everything else, sleeping bags and napkins and surgical gauze and everything that you needed, tents. Where do you get that stuff from? You don't call up Amazon, which didn't exist at that point. The military stockpiles that and then sends it to the front lines, wherever it's needed. And in Charlotte, there was an area that's now known as Camp North End. We'll tell more about that story in general. But during World War II, it was an Army quartermaster depot. It was an old Model T Ford assembly plant, huge, sprawling thing on the west side of town off of Statesville Avenue. And it was where not only the supplies went out to the front, but in the latter days of the war, as bodies came back, people who had given their lives in the service, they would come back through the quartermaster depot and then be sent to family members in the communities where those folks had grown up. So that quartermaster story is one that Ché and I did not know much about. And as you're hearing, we're enjoying discovering all of this.
Well, Tom, that's really, really awesome history and leads us into, I think, an important fact to share with everyone is that as accomplished of a historian you are, the military is not necessarily your bailiwick per se. So I'm really excited to be working with you, bringing those skills to learning something that's new for you, also new for me, and hopefully a lot of what we're able to explore as neophytes in this world will be relatable to the audience. We'd love to get questions from them about what we're doing, how maybe we can use some of this to help other folks who are discovering lost soldiers or lost stories or relevant information about service time of African Americans, how that's contributed to all of our freedom and to the fabric of, this glorious country that we live in. I love America. We have a lot of great things because of the contributions of so many ordinary people, like you said. I think that these gentlemen may have started off ordinary, but all had some type of extraordinary drive or motivation to live beyond what was presented to them. And the military offered them an extreme choice to see the world and get some exposure to some new things that, weren't readily available or even on offer here in the United States for them. So can't wait to get more into the story, learn more about your attachments and experience with this, meet a ton of wonderful people. We mentioned Arthur Griffin, B.J. Caldwell, J. Michael Moore, just a few of the people here in Charlotte that are fascinated by these stories, but also participants in getting this information shared and the information that we will share. So Second Ward, I'm really excited about that. We mentioned Pottstown, where over 100 black men enlisted in the service, and Pottstown is a very small community. So
wow,
that's
over many decades.
Over many decades, but still very fascinating story about how that's changed, what additions that was able to do, or how that was able to grow families and grow their opportunities, et cetera, because of the experience that these men were willing to step into. So I think that is really what I have for today, Tom. Great to get you introduced to everyone. Great to get the story out there. I'm excited to be here and have folks get to know about me and my background a little bit, my attachment to this, and also my excitement really about sharing these stories, interacting with the community about the wonderful contributions these gentlemen have made, their struggles to make those contributions, and whatever other additions their existence and efforts have made to our country at large and our local community as well. So thank you.
You're listening to the Lost Soldiers podcast. Ché Abdullah, and I'm Tom Hanchett. We are grateful to the Carolina Room of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library. We are grateful to Veterans Bridge Home, to the group Wreaths Across America, to the Imaginon unit of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library, and to you. Thank you so much for listening. Be with us on another one of these podcasts looking at the ordinary history makers at Cedar Grove Cemetery.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, audience. We look forward to our next episode and hearing from you.
Thanks for listening to Lost Soldiers, a production of Wreaths Across America Radio, brought to you by SaveCedarGrove.org and HistorySouth.org.